4,000 meters, 2.5 miles. At that distance, the curvature of the Earth, the spin of the planet, and a single breath can turn a bullet into a stray piece of lead. They called it a ghost shot. Impossible. But Chief Petty Officer Sarah Jenkins didn't believe in ghosts. The air inside the Joint Special Operations Command briefing room in Bagram was thick with the smell of stale coffee and impending doom. The projection screen at the front of the room cast a harsh blue light across the faces of 20 hardened men and one woman. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Jenkins sat near the back, her eyes locked on the satellite imagery illuminating the dust motes in the air. She was a phantom in her own right, the first female Navy SEAL sniper to not just pass the grueling Bud S training, but to earn a spot on the most elite Tier 1 element the United States military had to offer. She didn't ask for the media attention that had quietly circled her career, and she didn't care for the whispered doubts in the mess hall. She only cared about the math. And the math on the screen was looking incredibly bad. Captain Robert Knox, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from weathered granite, tapped the screen with a laser pointer. The red dot danced over a jagged, snow-capped peak in the Hindu Kush Mountains, resting right on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. "Gentlemen, and Chief Jenkins," Knox began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. 48 hours ago, CIA assets confirmed the location of Anton Ivanov. He's moved from his safe house in Grozny to this high-altitude fortress. A collective murmur rumbled through the room. Anton Ivanov wasn't just another warlord. He was a broker of nightmares, a former Soviet chemical weapons engineer who had gone rogue. The intelligence community had been hunting him for 6 years. "Ivanov isn't there for the scenery," Knox continued, switching the slide. A grainy infrared image appeared, showing heavy transport trucks hidden under camouflage netting. He's finalizing the sale of 3 modified VX nerve gas warheads to a splinter cell looking to make a statement in Western Europe. The handoff happens tomorrow at 0600 local time. Once those warheads leave that valley, they vanish into the black market. We lose them, and thousands of innocent people die. Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell, sitting in the front row, leaned forward. "So we scramble the birds, hit the compound with hellfires, turn the whole mountain into glass." "Negative," Knox snapped. "Ivanov is paranoid. He's rigged the perimeter with advanced Russian-made SA-24 surface-to-air missiles. Any drone or strike fighter that gets within 10 miles will be painted and blown out of the sky before they can drop their payload." "And a ground assault?" Knox shook his head. "The terrain is vertical. The only approach is a single switchback road, littered with IEDs and heavy machine gun nests. A SEAL team would take massive casualties, and the firefight would give Ivanov plenty of time to execute the hostages he's using as human shields, pack the VX, and slip into the tunnel networks." Silence fell over the room. It was a classic no-win scenario, an impenetrable fortress, ticking clock, and zero margin for error. "So how do we take him off the board?" Mitchell asked, his brow furrowed. Knox clicked to the final slide. It showed a topographic map, highlighting a neighboring mountain peak across a massive, plunging valley. "We don't send an assault team, we send a sniper element. Infiltrate via high-altitude stealth jump onto Ridge 42, hump 5 miles through the snow, set up a hide, and neutralize Ivanov when he steps out to inspect the convoy." Jenkins leaned forward, her tactical mind instantly calculating the topography. She looked at the scale on the map. Her eyes widened slightly, a rare break in her usually stoic demeanor. Sergeant First Class William Cole, a legendary Army Ranger attached to the task force, let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Captain, with all due respect, what's the distance from Ridge 42 to the compound courtyard?" Knox hesitated for a fraction of a second. 4,023 meters. The room erupted. "That's a suicide mission," Cole shot back, standing up. 4 kilometers? You're out of your mind. The longest confirmed kill in history is just over 3,800 meters, and that was in a controlled environment with flat terrain. You're talking about shooting across a mountain valley with crosswinds that will tear a bullet apart. "It's a ghost shot," Mitchell agreed, shaking his head. "At that distance, the bullet is in the air for over 10 seconds. You have to account for the Coriolis effect, the spin drift of the round, aerodynamic jump, and the fact that the bullet will drop over 400 feet. The wind in that valley changes direction every 100 yards. You'd be firing blind." "They're right," Knox admitted softly. "The computers at Quantico ran the simulations. The probability of a first-round hit on a human-sized target at 4,000 meters in those atmospheric conditions is less than 2%. But it's the only option Washington has authorized. Knox looked around the room, his eyes scanning the faces of the best shooters in the world. I need volunteers. I need someone who can make a 2% shot. The silence was deafening. Even the most arrogant, confident shooters in the room knew their limits. A miss meant Ivanov would be spooked, the warheads would disappear, and the sniper team would be stranded in hostile territory with the entire hornet's nest buzzing around them. In the back row, a chair scraped against the concrete floor. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Jenkins stood up. She was 5'9", with intense, calculating green eyes and a posture that radiated quiet, lethal competence. "I'll take the shot, Captain," Jenkins said. Her voice was calm, cutting through the heavy air of the briefing room like a scalpel. Every head turned to look at her. Cole scoffed. "Jenkins, this isn't the sniper course at Fort Walker. This is the Hindu Kush. A-338. Lapua won't even reach the target. 50 calories will lose supersonic speed and tumble out of the sky. You don't have the gun, and you don't have the math." Jenkins looked at Cole, her expression unreadable. "I'm not taking a 338, William. I'm taking the custom 416 Barrett we've been testing at the lab. Machined monolithic solid bullets. It stays supersonic past 3,500 meters. And as for the math," she paused, looking back at the topographic map. "I grew up hunting in the high winds of the Colorado Rockies. I know how mountains breathe. I can make the math work." Knox studied her. He knew Jenkins' file backward and forward. She possessed an savant-like ability to read environmental conditions. Where other snipers relied heavily on their ballistics computers, Jenkins seemed to feel the wind, calculating barometric pressure and humidity as if she were a living, breathing kestrel meter. "You're sure about this, Sarah?" Knox asked. "Give me Corporal David Miller as my spotter," Jenkins replied, adjusting her posture. "We step off in 4 hours." The back of the C-17 Globemaster was freezing, the temperature hovering well below zero as the aircraft cruised at 30,000 feet. The red jump light bathed the cargo hold in a sinister glow. Jenkins and Miller sat shoulder to shoulder, strapped into their high-altitude, high-opening HAAO gear. Oxygen masks covered their faces, hissing rhythmically. Strapped to Jenkins' side was the weapon that would either save thousands of lives or get them both killed. A heavily modified bolt-action rifle chambered in 416 Barrett, weighing nearly 40 pounds. Miller, a 26-year-old math prodigy from Ohio, flashed her a quick thumbs up. He was the yin to her yang. If Jenkins was instinct and lethal precision, Miller was cold, hard data. Together, they were the most lethal sniper-spotter team in the JSOC arsenal. 2 minutes! The jumpmaster bellowed over the roar of the engines. The ramp lowered, revealing the pitch-black abyss of the night sky over the Hindu Kush. The cold rushed in, hitting them like a physical wall. "Green light! Go! Go! Go!" Jenkins dove into the darkness, Miller right behind her. They fell through the freezing atmosphere, deploying their canopies at 25,000 feet. The glide to Ridge 42 was silent, agonizing, and terrifying. They were flying blind through the jagged peaks, relying entirely on their GPS navigation boards. A sudden downdraft over the mountains grabbed Jenkins' parachute, plunging her violently toward a jagged rock face. "Fight it," she told herself, hauling on the toggles. Her muscles burned against the sheer force of gravity and the violent mountain winds. She cleared the rock face by less than 50 feet, her boots skimming the snow before she flared and hit the ground on a steep incline. Miller landed 30 yards away, immediately sinking waist-deep into the powder. They quickly buried their parachutes and checked their gear. They were at 3,200 meters. The hide site was at 4,500 meters. They had 5 miles to hike up a near-vertical slope in -30-degree weather, carrying 100 pounds of gear each. "Comms check," Jenkins whispered into her mic. "Loud and clear, Wraith," Miller replied, using her call sign. "Wind chill is brutal. My digits are already going numb." "Keep moving. The blood flow will save your fingers," she commanded, shouldering her massive pack. The ascent was a brutal, agonizing nightmare. The air grew thinner with every step, starving their lungs of oxygen. The snow was unyielding, hiding treacherous crevices beneath its pristine surface. For 3 hours, they climbed in absolute silence, communicating only through hand signals. Then, the mountain decided to fight back. Just as they reached the halfway point, a sudden whiteout blizzard swept over the ridge. Visibility dropped to absolute zero. The wind roared like a freight train, tearing at their heavy parkas. "We need to dig in," Miller shouted over the howling wind, leaning entirely forward just to stay upright. "No, if we stop, we freeze. We miss the window," Jenkins yelled back. She grabbed Miller's harness, pulling him forward. "Follow my tracks. Do not stop moving." It was a battle of pure will. Jenkins' legs felt like lead. Her lungs burned as if she were inhaling razor blades. But in her mind's eye, she saw the faces of the potential victims of the VX gas. She saw the smug face of Anton Ivanov. She pushed harder, her boots kicking steps into the ice. An hour later, the blizzard broke as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving behind a clear, terrifyingly crisp night sky. But the storm had exacted a toll. As they crested Ridge 42 and crawled on their bellies toward the precipice that overlooked the valley, Miller unzipped his pack to pull out their primary environmental sensor, the advanced Kestrel weather meter. He froze. Jenkins noticed the hesitation. "Talk to me, Miller." Miller pulled the device out. The digital screen was shattered, the delicate anemometer crushed. During the whiteout, when Miller had slipped on the ice, the impact against the rock had completely destroyed their most crucial piece of technology. "The Kestrel is dead," Miller whispered, his voice trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from the realization of what this meant. "Sarah, I can't give you exact barometric pressure. I can't give you humidity. And I can't map the wind shear across the valley. Without this data, the ballistics computer is practically blind." Jenkins looked down into the massive yawning abyss of the valley. 3 miles away, completely unaware of their presence, the lights of Ivanov's compound flickered in the darkness. The valley between them was a cauldron of chaotic thermal updrafts, crosswinds, and pressure zones. To hit a target at 4,000 meters, a sniper relies on their spotter and their computer to calculate exactly how the air will push and pull the bullet over 10 seconds of flight time. Without the Kestrel, it was like trying to thread a needle in the dark while riding a roller coaster. "They were right," Miller said, looking at the broken device. "It's a ghost shot now. We have to abort. We call in the strike, take the heat for the civilian casualties." Jenkins slowly slid the massive 416 Barrett off her back. She unfolded the bipod legs and settled the weapon into the snow, perfectly leveling the scope. She pressed her eye to the glass, turning the magnification up. Through the optics, the compound jumped into crystal clear view. She saw the armed guards, the heavy trucks, and the courtyard where the deal would take place. She watched the way the snow blew off the tin roofs. She watched the way the flags on the compound snapped in the wind. She looked down into the valley, tracking the movement of low-hanging clouds and the way the mountain brush swayed in the distance. "We aren't aborting," Jenkins said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "Sarah, you can't calculate a 4-kilometer shot by eye," Miller argued. "The bullet will drop over 400 MOA. A 1-mile-per-hour miscalculation in the wind will throw the bullet 20 feet off target." "I don't need a machine to tell me what the mountain is doing, David," she replied, never taking her eye off the scope. "Get on the glass. The sun is coming up. Ivanov is going to walk out that door in 20 minutes. Get out your notebook." "We're doing the math the old-fashioned way." The Hindu Kush Mountains cared nothing for the desperate stakes of human conflict. As dawn bled over the jagged eastern peaks, painting the endless snowfields in harsh hues of violet and gold, the valley below began to wake. With the sun came the most dangerous enemy a sniper could face: the wind. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Jenkins remained perfectly motionless behind the massive 416 Barrett rifle. The freezing air had long since seeped through her advanced thermal layers, settling deep into her bones, but she forced her body into a state of zen-like rigidity. Her resting heart rate, usually a calm 60 beats per minute, dropped to 45. She had entered the bubble, a state of absolute, hyper-focused isolation where the rest of the world ceased to exist, leaving only the glass of the optical scope and a target over 2.5 miles away. Beside her, Corporal David Miller was visibly shivering. His ungloved fingers were pale and stiff as he furiously scribbled inside a waterproof tactical notebook. Without the Kestrel weather meter to feed them precise barometric and atmospheric data, they were effectively blind. They were forced to rely on old-school ballistics techniques that hadn't been primary doctrine since the Vietnam War.
"Talk to me, David,"
Jenkins whispered, her voice barely carrying over the whistling gusts. "Density altitude is the killer today," Miller muttered, his teeth chattering as he worked the complex mathematical formulas by hand. "We are sitting at roughly 4,500 meters of elevation. The air is incredibly thin up here, which means there is less drag on the bullet. That is the only reason the 416 round will even reach the compound. But the ambient temperature is sitting at minus 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold air is denser. It is going to fight the bullet every single inch of the way." Jenkins kept her right eye glued to the optic, the magnification dialed up to its absolute maximum. At 4 kilometers away, the fortress was heavily distorted by mirage, the rippling optical illusion caused by light refracting through atmospheric layers of varying temperatures. Usually, snipers curse a heavy mirage, but for Jenkins, it was the only environmental tool she had left. "Read the boil," Jenkins commanded quietly. She watched the heat waves rising off the corrugated tin roofs of the compound. "The mirage is leaning hard from right to left," she observed, her breathing slow and measured. "The angle looks to be about 45 degrees. Wind down in the target basin is blowing steadily at maybe 8 to 10 miles per hour." "It is not the basin wind I am worried about, Sarah," Miller replied, squinting through his high-powered spotting scope. "It is the cross-canyon draft. Look at the tree line on the secondary ridge directly beneath them." Jenkins shifted her reticle down. 2 miles out, right in the middle of the bullet's intended flight path, a patch of hardy mountain pines was thrashing violently. "There is a localized jet stream cutting straight through the center of the valley," Miller said, his pencil snapping against the paper in sheer frustration. "It is blowing left to right. That is the exact opposite of the basin wind. I am clocking it at 20 miles per hour, minimum. If you hold your crosshairs for the basin wind, that mid-valley shear will blow the projectile 40 feet off target before it even begins its final descent." "Calculate the spin drift," Jenkins ordered, her voice completely devoid of panic. "The Barrett has a right-hand twist barrel. Over 4,000 meters, the aerodynamic jump and spin drift will pull the bullet aggressively right, and we have to account for the Coriolis effect. We are shooting east to west. The Earth is literally rotating underneath the bullet while it is in the air. The target will drop away from the round." Miller frantically tabulated the final data. "Sarah, you are going to have to aim off target, way off target. You cannot even hold this inside the reticle. You need to dial your turrets to the maximum limit, and then hold high in the glass. I am calculating a hold of 62 mils high and 14 mils left." At that extreme distance, a 6.2 MIL hold meant she was essentially aiming into the sky, treating the sniper rifle like a piece of light artillery. She would be aiming at a patch of empty atmosphere hundreds of feet above and to the left of the actual compound. Down in the valley, the heavy steel gates of the fortress swung open. 3 armored tactical vehicles rolled into the courtyard. "Target area is active," Jenkins reported. "The convoy has arrived." Out of the lead vehicle stepped a broad-shouldered man in a heavy gray overcoat. Jenkins immediately recognized the rigid posture. CIA intelligence had been perfectly accurate. It was Klaus Richter, a notorious European arms broker. A moment later, the main doors of the compound's central building opened. Flanked by 4 heavily armed guards, Anton Ivanov walked out into the freezing air. "Visual ID. I have jackpot," Jenkins said, settling her finger against the trigger. "Confirmed," Miller breathed, his eye locked on the spotting scope. "He is stationary by the truck. Distance is exactly 4,023 meters. Wind is holding." Jenkins shifted her heavy rifle, dragging the crosshairs completely off the compound and aiming at the empty blue sky above the mountain peak. She exhaled slowly, finding her natural respiratory pause, and applied 3 pounds of steady, rearward pressure to the trigger. The massive 416 Barrett roared, shattering the absolute silence of the Hindu Kush. The ghost shot was away. 1. The monolithic solid copper bullet tore out of the muzzle at nearly 3,000 feet per second, instantly breaking the sound barrier. It ripped through the freezing thin air of the upper ridge, burning a microscopic vacuum tunnel through the atmosphere. 2. 3. Down in the valley, Anton Ivanov casually gestured toward the crate. He hadn't heard the gunshot. The bullet was traveling much faster than the speed of sound. For him, the world was perfectly normal. 4, 5. The bullet crossed into the massive, yawning void of the Central Valley. Here, the localized jet stream grabbed it. A 20-mile-per-hour crosswind slammed into the side of the rotating projectile. A lesser bullet would have tumbled, lost its gyroscopic stability, and fallen out of the sky, but the 416 Barrett, designed for this exact impossible physics, held its spin. It began to drift heavily to the right, exactly as Miller had calculated. 6, 7. The bullet began its massive parabolic descent. Gravity clawed at it, dragging it downward. It had already dropped over 200 feet from its original trajectory. It was bleeding velocity rapidly, but because of its extreme ballistic coefficient, it retained its supersonic crack. 8. He's shifting his weight, Miller hissed in a panic, watching through the spotting scope. Down in the courtyard, Ivanov turned slightly, reaching into his coat pocket for a cigarette. 9. The bullet dropped past the jagged peaks, entering the microclimate of the compound's basin. The wind reversed, pushing back against the bullet. The rotation of the Earth subtly shifted the target area millimeters beneath the projectile's path. 10. In the courtyard, Anton Ivanov never got his cigarette out. The 416 caliber round, still carrying the kinetic energy of a freight train, struck him dead center in the chest. The impact was devastating. The sheer kinetic shockwave lifted the warlord completely off his feet, violently throwing him backward into the armored grille of the transport truck. He crumpled to the snow-covered ground, dead before his brain could even register the sound of the rifle shot that had ended his life. Half a second later, the booming, thunderous crack of the gunshot finally echoed down into the valley, rolling over the compound like a clap of divine judgment. Chaos erupted instantly. The Splinter Cell mercenaries and Ivanov's guards panicked. Klaus Richter dove behind the truck tire, screaming in German. The heavily armed Russian guards, completely unable to comprehend where a shot of that magnitude had come from, began firing their PKM machine guns wildly into the surrounding mountainsides. Tracers lit up the morning sky, chewing up rocks and trees on the ridges a mile below Jenkins and Miller.
"Target neutralized! Jackpot is down!" Miller shouted, his voice cracking with sheer disbelief. He looked at Jenkins, his eyes wide. "You actually hit him. It was a perfect center mass impact."
"Sarah, you just made the longest shot in human history." Jenkins didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. She immediately began breaking down the massive rifle. "We don't get a medal if we freeze to death or get hit by a lucky mortar. Pack it up, David. They're going to launch the QRF." Down in the valley, the confusion was rapidly turning into organized retaliation. Sirens began to wail across the compound. The SA-24 anti-air systems remained dormant. They were useless against two humans hiding in the snow, but Jenkins could see heavy mortars being wheeled out into the courtyard. "They're going to start walking artillery shells up the ridges until they find us," Jenkins said, shoving the heavy barrel of the Barrett into her tactical pack. "Base, this is Wraith," Miller yelled into his comms unit. "Jackpot is down. I say again, Jackpot is down. Handoff is aborted. We are compromised and requesting immediate exfiltration." Thousands of miles away, in a secure JSOC command center, General Thomas T-Bone Gallagher exhaled a breath he felt he'd been holding for hours. He turned to his communications officer. "Tell the Night Stalkers to go loud. Get our people off that mountain." Back on Ridge 42, the first enemy mortar shell shrieked through the air, impacting half a mile below their position. The explosion sent a massive plume of black dirt and white snow high into the air. "Move! Move! Move!" Jenkins yelled. They didn't hike down, they practically slid. Plunging down the treacherous, icy backside of the ridge, they used their massive packs as makeshift sleds to lose altitude as fast as possible. Above them, the mountain ridge they had just occupied was systematically pounded into dust by heavy mortar fire, the deafening explosions echoing off the canyon walls. For 2 grueling hours, they evaded patrols, outran avalanches triggered by the artillery, and pushed their bodies past the absolute limits of human endurance. Finally, in a small hidden ravine 3 miles from the ridge, the familiar, beautiful thumping sound of stealth rotors cut through the wind. A sleek black MH-60M Black Hawk helicopter, operated by the legendary 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, flared over the ravine, kicking up a massive snowstorm. The side door slid open, revealing a crew chief frantically waving them in. Jenkins and Miller collapsed onto the metal floor of the bird as it immediately banked hard, diving low through the valleys to avoid radar detection, speeding back toward Bagram. Miller lay on his back, staring at the ceiling of the helicopter, completely drained. He reached into his vest, pulled out the Write in the Rain notebook, and looked at the frantic math scribbled on the pages. He shook his head, laughing weakly. "It was impossible," Miller muttered. "The math said it was impossible." Sarah Jenkins sat up, resting her hand on the heavy case containing her rifle. She looked out the window at the receding, hostile peaks of the Hindu Kush. She had achieved the impossible, securing the VX gas and eliminating a global threat without a single friendly casualty. She was a phantom who had reached out across 4,000 meters of thin air to change the course of history. "The math is never wrong, David," Jenkins said quietly, her green eyes reflecting the morning sun. "You just have to know how to read the mountain." If you were captivated by the unbelievable true grit of Chief Jenkins and the legendary 4-kilometer ghost shot, do not let this story fade into the shadows. Hit that like button to show your respect for the silent professionals who hold the line. Share this video with your friends to spread the incredible history of tactical mastery, and make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another deep dive into the world's most thrilling military operations.